How? How? Seriously, how? How does this keep happening?
Are we shocked? Are we surprised? Do we care? Do we even care anymore? For what seems like the umpteenth time, Premier League referees are grabbing the headlines for all the wrong reasons, after an even sadder looking version of Eeyore, Chris Kavanagh, made one of the most egregious decisions I've ever seen a referee make. That is, besides ruling out this goal for Liverpool and allowing Air Bud to play in a game.
Ain't no rules so the dog can't play basketball.
Do you really need a rule for that? Do you really need someone to tell you that a dog cannot be on the court? However, I will say, if your team loses to a golden retriever, it's deserved. You're a terrible coach and your players are bums. Now, I know that I'm an Arsenal fan and I could be seen as complaining or annoying for talking about the refs. After all, that's what's been happening across the footballing world the past few days. However, even though I will be talking about that Rice decision, mostly on the advice of my therapist because venting about it keeps out the dark thoughts, I mainly want to highlight just how truly horrendous the Premier League refereeing has been as a whole. While some points I'll be talking about will include Arsenal, it's a lot bigger than just one club, and in order to fix this problem, we must put our biases aside. After all, this officiating issue that's occurring in England affects everyone, from the Big Six to those battling relegation. So let's discuss what some of these calls are, as well as how big of an issue this truly is, and what we can do moving forward. But to begin, let's go back to this one again.
Seriously, like what the f***, dude?
If you've somehow missed the controversy of Declan Rice being sent off, here's the gist of it. Rice was already on a yellow card after this challenge in the 42nd minute, which... yeah, no, like 100% fair enough. And then in the second half, Rice proceeded to foul a Brighton player after losing possession. The Brighton player rolled the ball towards Rice to try to take a quick free kick. Rice touched the ball away. The Brighton player kicked the ever-living out of Rice, and Rice was promptly sent off. Now, I know there's a lot going on here, but let's just start with this specific situation, and then we'll bring in some context later. For one, I have to say, that's just a smart move by Veltman. I mean, he knows that he can't get a free kick off in that situation. He's rolled the ball out, it's still moving, and it's like 10 yards away from where he started. He's just seeing if he can cause chaos, which he did. I obviously don't like that it happened to my team, but not gonna lie, I respect the hell out of it. But moving on, the main argument for this red card is that Rice delayed the restart. That, at least, is the official reason given by the PGMOL, the Referee Association in England. However, straight away, there seems to be a couple things wrong with this explanation. As I mentioned before, the ball was still rolling, therefore the ball cannot be put into play. It would have been an illegal kick to begin with, so there's not necessarily a delay to begin with. Now, some could argue that the ball rolling doesn't really matter because Rice still kicked the ball away. And I'm putting kicked in air quotes because it's more like a touch, a graze, like a soft breeze on a crisp fall morning. In fact, a better example of kicking the ball away is something that a Brighton player did in the first half, completely booting it so Arsenal would have their throw-in delayed. That clearly has all of the makings of a yellow card according to the letter of the law. So, was a card given out to João Pedro in that situation? No, of course not. Now, despite all of this, some people still think that Rice was correctly sent off, and they are repeating certain refs in order to back up their claim, like the former Premier League ref and the human version of Cecil Turtle, Dermot Gallagher. Now, he said he supported the red card for two reasons, one of them being that he thinks Rice knew what he was doing, and while I don't necessarily disagree, that's not exactly possible to prove, and the second is that he kicked the ball completely out of bounds, making it impossible to restart play. You know, the literal exact same thing that João Pedro did in the first half. Common sense says that if you don't book João Pedro for this, you certainly cannot book Rice for that. But you know, common sense isn't really that common anymore, and that applies to old Dermot here, who says that common sense and refereeing don't go hand in hand. Now look, I'm not a ref, okay? And I get that it's a very thankless job, but shut the f*** up. The common sense you're talking about is to avoid the issue and not carry out his duties. No, the common sense is about consistency. That's what the conversation has been about the vast majority of the time. If Pedro was booked for that kick in the first half, then sure, I'd be willing to accept Rice's booking in the second half. Again, consistency is the biggest reason for all of these debates, and it doesn't just happen in one game, but it spans across multiple games across a season, and even across the years as well. Okay, I'm done about the Arsenal game, okay? I'm done. Just from this season alone, we've seen moments of inconsistency in the same match and between other matches. The whole Rice red card incident showed inconsistency within the same match, as we've mentioned before, but there was a great example of proper refereeing between Arsenal and Aston Villa the match week before. In the first half, Saliba wins the ball but is fouled and goes down. The whistle is blown, and immediately after, John McGinn fires the ball into Saliba's chest. Ben White sees this and fires back into John McGinn. In this incident, the ref brought both players aside, talked to them, warned them that they were on thin ice, and moved on. Now, by the letter of the law, it is said that a yellow card must be given out to a player if they commit unsporting behavior. You could definitely argue that both of these instances were unsporting behavior, but they weren't given any cards. In my opinion, it was correct to not hand out any cards, but rather just manage the situation. Now, if Ben White's retaliation was greater than McGinn's, or if perhaps this was later on in the match, then sure, some bookings could have been thrown out. But both of these actions were seen as moments of frustration with similar amounts of intensity, and the referee did the sensible thing, the common sense thing, which I guess is frowned upon in the referee association. Now, even though this situation was handled well, you could compare this to Rice's red card and be confused as to why that was punished, but this previous one was not. And it's because this game is so rooted in inconsistency among the refs that all of this spans across multiple seasons, like I mentioned before. In the second match week, Bournemouth had a late winner taken away because of a handball offense. The picture here shows where it hit the Bournemouth player, which is around the t-shirt sleeve line that is now used to determine handballs. Now, it's hard to say whether or not this is indeed a handball, so because of the lack of evidence, the call on the field cannot be overturned, and thus, the goal should have stood. And yet, obviously, it didn't. And while I'm sure a lot of Bournemouth fans were deservedly annoyed at that call, that's not exactly what made me so upset. A few seasons ago, in February of 2022, Manchester City's Rodri had the ball strike his arm in virtually the exact same area as the Bournemouth player, and with intent as well. Yet in this case, it was deemed to not be a handball, and no penalty was awarded to Everton at that time. I mean, these two images are basically identical. The ball is being struck exactly at the sleeve line, yet not only was the outcome different, the process to get to the final decision was also different. And so not only do you have this inconsistency between situations that are virtually identical, but then you have the incompetence added on top of that. Like a goal being disallowed for something that happens on every free kick, Neto being absolutely clotheslined with no punishment to Joelinton, Brereton Diaz initiating contact at the head but Schär being the one sent off instead, or Kai Havertz getting quite literally choked and VAR not looking at it. All of this happened in the first 3 weeks of this season. Now, the decision making of some of these refs is questionable at best and suspiciously rigged at worst. I get that it's annoying to talk about this stuff nearly week in and week out, and I also get that some fans will be talking about it more because, unfortunately, some teams will just be unlucky and be stuck with bad refs and poor decisions more often. So what can we do exactly? What can we do to climb this mountaintop of a problem? Well, the first thing is to just continue talking about it. Make sure that every wrong decision is put on full blast so then we can hold these refs accountable, and at the very least, it will make for some good memes so it won't all be for nothing. Another thing would be to ask for common sense rule changes, and again, I know that this turtle looking ass says that common sense and refereeing don't go hand in hand, but it clearly obviously absolutely should. For example, when a player is given 2 yellow cards and sent off, that is not reviewable by VAR because you can't check yellow cards. Why not? It's affecting the match the exact same way that a straight red card is, so why not have that be reviewable as well? And lastly, it's important for every fan base to try to stick together when dealing with these calls. I get that that can be difficult given that rivalries exist, it can affect a title race, and that fans think the league is out to get them specifically, but we have to call out poor officiating in every situation, regardless if it's against or in favor of our club. We can't keep going at this rate, unfortunately, because if we do, the refs are going to allow Air Bud to come play. Oh my god, they already did. What is happening? What is this sport turning into?